Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into an event that didn't just shake up the 16th century, it violently reshaped the entire globe. We're talking about the Siege of Tenochtitlan. But this wasn't just a single military battle. It was a catastrophic collision of completely different civilizations. So we're going to unpack the structural, biological, and strategic forces that all collided to bring down an absolute powerhouse of an empire. It's the ultimate historical puzzle, right? How exactly did a handful of foreigners manage to topple an empire of millions? Well, what we'll uncover today is that it wasn't some simple, straightforward conquest. It was actually an intricate, devastating, perfect storm of political timing, technological clashes, and unseen biological factors. Here is our roadmap for the explainer. First, we'll look at a fragile imperial giant. Then, the arrival of the Spanish. After that, we'll dive into the harrowing 93-day siege and wrap up with the dawn of a new era. Okay, let's jump straight into part one, a fragile imperial giant, the zenith and vulnerability of the Mexica. To really grasp their vulnerability, we kind of need to zoom out and look at the massive scale of the Mexica or Aztec Empire on the eve of this conflict. They were at the absolute peak of their power. The capital, Tenochtitlan, was an engineering marvel, practically floating on artificial islands called chinampas. But here's the catch. That immense power rested on a very delicate foundation. It relied heavily on extracting massive wealth from the Altapitl. These were conquered city-states forced into a really complex, hegemonic tribute system. You see, the Mexica didn't rule with standing armies stationed in every single town. They ruled through intimidation. And that brings us to the empire's fatal flaw. It wasn't some unified, happy utopia. It was literally a ticking time bomb of internal dissent, just waiting for someone to light the fuse. The core of the empire had this insatiable demand for tribute. We're talking textiles, precious metals, and tons of food. On top of that, their religious cosmology required elaborate, ritualistic human sacrifices, which they often drew from those exact subjugated populations. As you can imagine, this created incredibly deep resentment and completely alienated the neighboring peripheral city-states. So the stage is set. Let's move to part two, arrival of the Spanish. Ambition, technology, and a world unprepared. Right into this highly tense political climate steps Hernán Cortés in 1519. He's leading a small, heavily armed contingent driven by a wild mix of ambition for wealth, religious zeal, and a hunger for personal glory under the Spanish crown. And has sparked a massive philosophical mismatch in how warfare was even fought. Mexico warfare was highly ritualized. Their goal was usually to capture enemies alive for sacrifice and to expand that tribute base we just talked about. Spanish military doctrine, on the other hand, it was geared toward total annihilation and complete subjugation. The Mexica were completely unprepared for an adversary who simply ignored their traditional rules of engagement. It was a totally different playbook. Now, you might have heard the old myth of simple European superiority, but Spanish survival actually relied completely on brilliant, albeit ruthless, political manipulation. Yes, they had steel weapons, early firearms, and armored cavalry, but what was absolutely crucial was the intelligence they received from indigenous interpreters, like the Nahua woman known as Malinche. She helped Cortés navigate the complex local political rivalries. This allowed the Spanish to form massive military alliances with thousands of resentful local warriors, particularly the Tlaxcalans. And, tragically, the Spanish brought along unseen biological weapons, European pathogens, diseases like smallpox to which the indigenous populations had zero immunity. Which leads us directly to the climax in part three, the 93-day siege, a multifaceted military and biological catastrophe. Tracking this timeline, we can see how this clash escalated into a gruesome nightmare. Cortés arrived in 1519, but by 1520, the momentum shifted tragically. Smallpox absolutely ravaged the city. It even killed the Mexico ruler Cuitlahuac. The rapid spread of this disease acted as an unseen accelerator. It decisively weakened the city's population and its warriors long before the final brutal spring blockade even began in 1521. Ultimately, that blockade culminated in the city's fall in August. How did they do it? Well, actually, scratch that. It wasn't just a simple attack. Cortés executed a highly calculated, ruthless strategy of attrition. Step 1. Sever the causeways connecting the island city to the mainland, cutting off all food and fresh water. Step 2. Build and deploy shallow draft ships called brigantines to violently control Lake Texcoco. And Step 3. Launch aggressive urban assaults backed by their indigenous allies. Against all this, the new Aztec ruler, Cuauhtémoc, mounted a desperate, incredibly heroic defense, using the city's intricate network of canals to fight hand-to-hand, street by street. As historians note, the fall of Tenochtitlan was not a single decisive battle, but a gradual erosion of the city's defenses and its population's will to resist. I think that perfectly captures the horrifying reality here. It wasn't some swift, glorious victory you read about in storybooks. It was a slow, agonizing suffocation of a magnificent civilization through starvation, rampant disease, and relentless everyday assault. Finally, let's step back and look at the big picture in Part 4, Dawn of a New Era, the aftermath and enduring legacies. Following the city's surrender in August 1521, the physical conquest birthed world-altering consequences. The old Aztec tribute system was swiftly replaced by something called the encomienda system. Basically, this legally granted Spanish conquistadors the rights to indigenous labor and tribute. It was a comprehensive process of economic restructuring that essentially just replaced the old Aztec political structures with a system of brutal economic exploitation. This forced labor, especially down in the silver mines, would very soon fuel the massive global wealth and expansion of the Spanish Empire. 90%. Think about that staggering number for a second. That represents the estimated demographic collapse of the indigenous population in many areas within just a single century of contact, driven by diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza, and then heavily compounded by the sheer violence of conquest and the brutal conditions of forced labor. It's a profoundly sobering reality of what historians now call the Great Dying. Even physically, the landscape was permanently altered. The new colonial capital, Mexico City, was built directly upon the destroyed ruins of Tenochtitlan. The Spanish literally constructed their new administrative and religious center, utilizing the very foundations and the strategic location of the old empire. This act, literally and symbolically building a new city on the ashes of the old, marked the violent birth of a completely new world order. So what does this all mean for us today? How does the legacy of this profound clash of civilizations continue to shape our understanding of human rights, imperialism, and cultural resilience? Interestingly enough, the debates that kicked off back then over the morality of the conquest actually laid the very early groundwork for our modern discussions of human rights. I'll leave you with this provocative thought. The echoes of Tenochtitlan's fall still resonate vividly through our modern world, constantly reminding us of the immense, often tragic, and deeply enduring complexities of power and human history.